Welcome on back, everybody. This is the All Aussie Rules YouTube channel. This is version 2 of the 2024 Ladder Predictor. We're going to go through the remaining 6 or so games, whatever it is. I can't even work it out in my head. Games for each team for the rest of the season. We're going to try and rush through it as quick as we can. Hopefully keep it about 10 to 15 minute video. Have a look at what the ladder is. This is all based on numbers, nothing to do with my thoughts, really. It's my thoughts, I guess I created the system, but it basically just uses predicted score to equate who we think is going to win and by how much. I won't talk about the margins, but just know that I have adjusted margins for each game as well, using the AFL website. So let's jump straight into the first week. This is this weekend. We've got the Bombers beating the Crows. We've got St Kilda beating West Coast. I can almost talk well. GWS beating Gold Coast. Hawthorn to beat Collingwood. Geelong to beat the Dogs. Port Adelaide beating Richmond. Sydney in what is possibly game of the round beating Brisbane. Fremantle beating Melbourne. And to round out the week, Carlton beating North Melbourne. We'll have the ladder sitting as such. I know the window's a bit weird. Actually, I can try and fix that as a little bit as we go. Sydney, obviously, are way out in front. Carlton, Geelong, Fremantle, Essendon, GWS, Port Adelaide, Brisbane. Interesting to note, Hawthorn right in contention for finals now if they can beat Collingwood this week. Meanwhile, Collingwood dropped down to 13th and their season is looking like it might struggle. Next up, next week, and we have Carlton beating Port Adelaide on Friday night in what should be a cracker, although Carlton did beat Port Adelaide over in Adelaide, so you'd kind of expect them to win this one. Geelong to beat North Melbourne, no surprise there. Essendon to take on St Kilda at Marvel. Brisbane beating Gold Coast at People First Stadium to be Gold Coast's first home loss of the season. GWS beating Melbourne. Freo to beat West Coast. Collingwood to beat Richmond. Sydney to beat the Dogs, and rounding out the week, Hawthorn over at Adelaide Oval beating Adelaide. Changes to the ladder this week. Hawthorn are now equal with 8th, just down on percentage. Brisbane have dropped down to 7th. GWS are in 6th, Essendon 5th. Fremantle still hanging around in 4th. Other than that, Doggies looking in trouble. They might struggle to make finals at this rate. Next up, we have 2 Friday night games this week. We've got Bulldogs beating Melbourne to keep their season alive. Probably finish Melbourne's there. Gold Coast to beat West Coast over there to be their first away win of the season after I had them losing their first home game the week before. North Melbourne to beat Richmond in the battle of the bottom 2 teams. Geelong to beat Adelaide. Carlton to beat Collingwood. Sydney to go over to Adelaide and beat Port Adelaide, but that game could go either way. Hawthorn to beat GWS, which that's an interesting result there. Freo, also another interesting result, beating the Bombers. And then Brisbane to beat St Kilda. That has us now sitting with Sydney on top, Carlton still second, Geelong third. Freo continues to push for top 4. Brisbane drop out of the top 4. Essendon 6. GWS 7, Hawthorn into the 8 by a game, but still their percentage is below that of Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide 9, Bulldogs staying in contention in 10th, but we'll need a lot of luck with 3 games to go, 2 games out of the 8. Gold Coast, Collingwood, Melbourne. Then we have the next week, it's a big Friday night game, Sydney, Collingwood at the SCG. Collingwood season, if it goes the way that we've suggested here, is probably already over. But Sydney will put the nail in that coffin. They'll win that one. Brisbane to beat GWS. West Coast in the battle of second bottom versus third bottom. Down at Blundstone Arena, get the win over North. Freo to beat Geelong. Essendon to beat Gold Coast. Port Adelaide to beat Melbourne in Melbourne. Hawthorn beating Carlton, which is an upset. St Kilda to beat Richmond and Bulldogs to beat Adelaide. what does that give us? Fremantle into second spot on the ladder is huge for them. Carlton, Geelong round out the top 4. Brisbane sitting in 5th. Hawthorn up to 7th, massive for them. Once again, still a game, but less percentage inside the 8. GWS have dropped to 8th in their season, all of a sudden in trouble. Of course, in actual football, current form, you'd suggest that that's probably not going to happen because they have turned their season around a little bit. Anyway, Port Adelaide 9, Bulldogs 10, still in contention. Gold Coast 11, Collingwood 12, Melbourne 13. You'd think top 10 a chance at this point. Round 22, second last round of the season. Sydney to beat Essendon at Marvel Stadium on Friday night. Gold Coast beating Melbourne. Freo beating GWS, which would be a surprise and an upset, although they did go to Sydney earlier this year and beat Sydney, so you never know. Brisbane to beat Collingwood. Port Adelaide to beat Adelaide. Geelong to beat St Kilda. Bulldogs to beat North Melbourne. Hawthorn at the MCG beating Richmond. And West Coast losing to Carlton. Interestingly, what's most notable here? Hawthorn into 6th and 2 games inside the 8. Huge result there. Bombers dropped down to 7th with 1 game to go, thus safely in the 8 though. Looking at this, the only change that could happen is Bulldogs and Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide going out and either Bulldogs or GWS going in. Other than that, everyone else is out of range according to these numbers. Top 4, Sydney obviously have a sealed top spot. 2nd through 4, 5, all capable of being anyone from Fremantle down to Brisbane. While technically Hawthorn could make the top 4, it's pretty much impossible. They would need to win by 300 odd points. Final games of the season, not just the round. Brisbane beating Essendon, Carlton beating St Kilda, Geelong beating the Eagles, Hawthorn beating North Melbourne, Melbourne to beat Collingwood, Gold Coast to beat Richmond for their 2nd away win of the season, Bulldogs to beat GWS, Sydney to beat Adelaide, and the final game is Fremantle beating Port Adelaide. That leaves us with an interesting ladder. We've got Sydney on top, Fremantle 2nd, Carlton 3rd, Geelong 4th. Brisbane 5th, missing out on top 4 by half a game on Geelong. Hawthorn, Essendon, Bulldogs round out the 8, just missing out Port Adelaide, Gold Coast, then GWS, Melbourne, Collingwood, St Kilda, Adelaide, West Coast, North Melbourne and Richmond getting the wooden spoon. A look at what that would mean for finals football. Week 1 would be Sydney, Geelong in Sydney, Brisbane hosting the Bulldogs, Hawthorn hosting Essendon and Fremantle hosting Carlton. 3 interstate fixtures in week 1, and I've just gone home teams in all 4 of them. Hawthorn Essendon would be an absolute cracker in week 1 of the finals. Sydney Geelong, rematch of 2 years ago grand final. Brisbane Bulldogs up at the Gabba would be huge. Both teams have a good chance in that. And Fremantle hosting Carlton would be massive as well for week 1 of the finals. Week 2 would then see Geelong hosting Brisbane down in Victoria and Carlton hosting Hawthorn on what would be an absolute cracker of a game. So Carlton winning that and Geelong beating Brisbane. Week 3 of the finals would be Sydney hosting Carlton for a spot in the grand final and Fremantle hosting the Cats also for a spot in the grand final. I've gone for the 2 home teams, which of course leaves the grand final. I don't have a picture of it. I didn't take a screenshot apparently, but obviously would be Sydney hosting Fremantle, well not hosting, but Sydney versus Fremantle at the MCG in what would be an interesting game. Both teams obviously played grand finals similar times. Last time Fremantle were there, I think Fremantle were the year before or year after. They kind of blew their chance against Hawthorn. So it'd be interesting to see how they would go. Maybe one last chance for Fife to get that premiership. You never know. But that's the numbers. That's what we've got as what the numbers are telling us for the rest of the season. Just a quick comparison to what I had as my previous ladder. I I don't know if this will show up or not. Let's see what I can do. You can kind of see it for a quick little look. That's the ladder last time I did a video. So Sydney stay on top. Fremantle go from 4th to 2nd. Carlton drop from 2nd down to 3rd. Geelong, big movers. They've gone from 12th to 4th. They've turned their season around. Brisbane go from 3rd down to 5th. Hawthorn, another big mover. They've gone from 10th to 6th. Essendon have dropped from 6th down to 7. Bulldogs have gone from 5th to 8th. Port Adelaide have stayed 9th. Gold Coast have gone from 11 up to 10. GWS have gone from 7 down to 11. Melbourne have gone from 13 up to 12. Collingwood from 8 down to 13. St Kilda have stayed 14. Adelaide 15. West Coast have stayed 16. And then North Melbourne and Richmond have swapped. So that's it. That's my predictions for the end of season. As you can see, we've got one too many. That's the prediction. I'm going to put out a short over the coming days and a TikTok and all that with a little my brain prediction. So what my actual thoughts on the results are. We'll see how different it is. But that will be coming out in coming days. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Check out both here and Spotify, where the podcast comes out twice a week on Mondays and Fridays, previewing and then reviewing each match of every round. So go check them out. There's plenty of content here on YouTube, on all my socials, so go check them out: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. It's always all Aussie rules, so go check them all out. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch us on the next one.